Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Africa 360. I'm your host, Kwangu Liwewe. Water, it's everywhere, covering most of the earth, and is quite literally what we humans are made of. And yet 748 million people still don't have access to safe, clean drinking water. The United Nations has identified the provision of clean water as one of its Millennium Development Goals. And while the world was able to halve the number of people without access to a sustainable water supply by 2010, Africa still lags behind worldwide. 60 million children are born into homes without water. And in sub-Saharan Africa, diarrhea is the third biggest killer of children under 5. Even those who have access to water cannot guarantee its source. But thanks to climate change, by 2025, 1,800 million people will live in regions of water scarcity. But even more disturbing, analysts believe that water may spark Africa's and perhaps even the world's next international conflict. Let's take a look.
The lap of water on the beach. A glistening horizon as the sun reflects on the water's edge. But all is not as tranquil as it seems. The next world war may be sparked by water. Historically, tensions over water have led to amicable sharing agreements. But as environmental pressures and growing populations make further demands on this precious resource, security experts believe conflict is bound to flare up. In 1990, clashes erupted between Nigeria and Cameroon over Lake Chad. The only source of fresh water in the Sahel region, the lake has already sunk to 90% of its original size. Climate change may lead to even more conflict. Egypt and Ethiopia are at loggerheads over the world's longest river, the Nile. In an effort to modernize the country, Ethiopia began the $4.2 billion Grand Renaissance Dam. It's set to produce 6,000 megawatts of electricity and, according to Egypt, will disrupt the river's flow, impacting millions in and around Cairo. In another dispute, Ethiopia invited the ire of Kenya this time with plans to dam the river Omo. Kenya claims this will disrupt water flows to Kenya's Lake Turkana, home to the Lake Turkana wind project, which is set to boost the country's electricity supply. And in southern Africa, Lake Malawi has sparked a diplomatic standoff. The decades-long disagreement between Tanzania and Malawi was reignited in 2011. SADC was forced to intervene when Malawi commissioned oil and gas exploration around the world's 8th largest lake. The Zambezi River, flowing within the SADC countries with a catchment area of 1.3 million square kilometers, occupying the territories of Angola, Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Zambia and Zimbabwe, has also been predicted as a potential source of conflict if water resources are not properly managed. Then there is the dispute pitting Kenya and Uganda over the ownership of water surrounding the Migingo Island, which sits on Lake Victoria, another potential water war hotspot. An estimated 300 million Africans don't have access to clean and safe water. The population of the continent is set to double in the next 20 years, which makes it essential to better regulate this ever-changing, ever-flowing resource without borders.
So how do we begin to change our mindset on water? Well, joining me to talk about water as a security issue are Tim Neary, who is an independent conservationist and researcher, and eNCA Africa editor Mark Klusner. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Tim, now water as a natural resource is usually seen as a humanitarian issue and not one that looks at governance. Is governance important at all when we're looking at water?
I think governance is tremendously important when looking at water because without governance, we're going to end up with the fact of no water to attend to any humanitarian issues whatsoever. And I think one of the issues people don't understand is that water is a finite resource.
So in terms of governance, Mark, how important is it actually?
Well, it's as Tim's saying, it is extremely important. We also need to see water not necessarily as a humanitarian issue, but really as an economic issue, because the future of a country and its people are dependent on how much water they have. It's, as Tim's saying, a finite resource, but it's also something which drives its industries, which drives its very population. It also has a role in education and in healthcare. So it is important for this as a resource, as a finite resource to be managed correctly by governments.
Now, African governments, are they taking water seriously?
I think in many occasions some of the African governments are taking water seriously, but I'm not too sure that the people are taking water seriously. And a lot of that is due to the way that we treat the water that we do have. Again, going back to the fact of it being a finite resource and the fact that people feel that, well, polluted water, we can clean it. We've got the equipment nowadays. So what if we pollute it? So what if we use it in the wrong way? Somebody else will fix the problem. And I think therein lies the first issue. It's very easy to turn around to say to a government, it is your responsibility. But I think the responsibility actually starts equally with the man in the street, right down at the bottom level.
And how do you empower the man on the street to know about the importance of water?
Education. And I think that's the first and foremost thing. For people to understand that the very water we're drinking now is exactly the same water the dinosaurs drank. We can't produce water. And if you think of it, we can go and we can grow any form of landscape we want to. We can grow agriculture, we can move a city, we can build infrastructure. But water we can't grow.
Now, Mark, another interesting scenario, another interesting thing about water, actually. We're seeing now issues, especially with bordering countries, because obviously water runs through many borders. The case of Malawi and Tanzania, of course, they have a problem there, Ethiopia, Egypt. How can we begin to look and resolve these issues?
Well, there are international conventions, there are various rules which govern the ownership of water, if you would like to call it that. But the real thing is it needs to be, governments need to get together and they need to basically share this resource, because as we say, it's a finite resource. We look at the issue particularly with the Nile, where we have Ethiopia decided that it's going to now dam up part of the Nile for a hydroelectric project. Egypt, of course, is incensed because it relies on that water almost entirely for the survival of the country. We had Egypt threatening to go to war over the fact that its water resources were now going to be dammed up. So certainly there does need to be some type of getting people together around a table, negotiating on exactly who controls it.
I think one of the aspects to look at there as well is that just simply putting up a dam wall sounds a simple base, but it isn't, because how is that affecting the people above the dam wall, the people that lived in the area, and of course the people below the dam wall? And then we start to look at the effect that it has on the various environments, the various biodiversity, etc. And suddenly you may find that putting in a dam changes the whole microclimate of an area, changes the whole farming aspect. People haven't got that water through flow down the bottom, so again it might be changing the quality of the water that people are receiving. So there is a lot more, I think, that maybe the man in the street doesn't understand as well about simply placing a dam wall. Why is it there?
Well, do stay with us, because after the break, we'll look at the human impact of water.
We need to make sure that we are protecting our water sources and the way that we're utilizing our water, and then we can look at the rest of it.
Welcome back to Africa 360. I'm Kwangu Liwewe. Today we're talking about a resource that is quite literally the source of life for everything on the planet, and yet it's taken for granted: water. And I'm joined in studio by independent conservationist and researcher Tim Neary and eNews Africa editor Mark Klusner. Now, what exactly needs to be done to ensure that water security is preserved on the continent?
Education again, right across the board, the fact of people getting together, and I think also understanding that water conflict might not necessarily be inter-country. That water conflict could very easily be within one's own country itself. So we can see vast issues around water in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, parts of Mozambique, and effectively across the continent, and it really has become a worldwide problem. So don't feel it is only here at all. Without water and without understanding it, we will in fact hobble ourselves when it comes to growth in every form. And of course that just means even foodstuffs. That will become a bigger issue.
Mark, who should be making noise about this issue, just to get the attention of the governments and the international community as a whole?
Well, I think everyone who uses water should be making a noise about it. Everyone should be raising it, because this depends, our future generations depend on the usage of this water. And so it's up to all of us, all citizens, to basically make sure that there is proper management of our water systems, of this resource, and that there is a way to ensure that future generations are not in a situation where they're fighting for this diminishing resource.
And talking about people fighting for this diminishing resource, the population, especially in Africa, is growing. How are we going to manage population versus water issues?
With a lot of difficulty, because without providing sufficient water, we aren't going to be able to provide sufficient employment or sufficient foodstuffs. So, yeah, and I think I'm going to go back to the fact of saying water starts with you, starts with Mark, starts with myself. We need to make sure that we are protecting our water sources and the way that we're utilizing our water, and then we can look at the rest of it. Then we'll, in fact, maybe require less water than we believe.
On a matter of human impact of water security, I visited Zambia and Malawi, countries that exemplify the need for access to clean and safe water. In Zambia, for example, I saw that urbanization and infrastructure don't guarantee a clean water source. In both countries, I learned that it's women and children who bear the brunt of the problem. It's a typical Wednesday morning in Kasasa, and Flora Ngoma and I are off to the stream to fetch some water for her household chores and to fend for her family. It's a tiresome and long-distance walk to the nearest stream, the only source of water in a 50-kilometer radius. And it's the women and children who bear the daily brunt of collecting water. But it's not just the homestead that is affected by the lack of access to safe water. Mdgs is the only primary school in the area, and it has 345 students enrolled here. They too do not have running water and have to rely on the same stream. It's especially challenging for the girls. 16-year-old Try Kumwenda says she doesn't enjoy school and has to miss classes at least once a month.
As girls, we face a lot of problems, especially when we are on our periods. We can't clean ourselves because there is no water. The boys in our class laugh at us when we mess ourselves, so I prefer staying home, but this affects my studies.
Without water and sanitation, young women like Try have to skip classes. They compromise their education and ultimately their future. The lack of clean water is not just a rural problem. In Kabwe, Zambia's second largest city, access to clean drinking water is not a given. The city is home to Africa's largest lead mine. Several years of unregulated mining took place until 1994, when the mines were shut down. Dust particles containing heavy metals have contaminated the water table. In the mining township of Kasanda, Lillian Jerry and her family are victims of the mine's toxic legacy.
In my home, I have got 3 children who are affected by lead because of water.
What happened to the children?
They cough, they are not even healthy. They are continuously coughing.
Despite this tap, there is no running water, leaving the community with no other alternative but to use a shallow well. The well here is open, exposing the water to contamination from lead dust particles. Like many countries on the continent, the Malawian and Zambian government's budget allocation for clean water is negligible. This is likely to have an impact on many African countries achieving the Millennium Development Goals. The Mdgs are a set of objectives the world has signed up to improve the lives of the most vulnerable. Part of Goal 7 is to ensure clean and safe water.
Meeting MDGs in Zambia is really unlikely because if we see now, the access rate is only 64%, and to meet our MDGs we need to reach 85%, and is just 1 year and I'm not sure we can meet MDGs.
Until African governments recognize the importance of clean and safe water, the future of millions of their citizens remains precarious. Mark, we've looked at water security on a macro level. How do we bring it down to the individual?
Well, I think the individual is the most important person because these are people who are using water on a daily basis. It's quite difficult for governments and conventions and stuff like that. We talk about it on this huge level, but it really is the person who, like we saw in that insert, the woman who has to carry the water, back home every day, or the girls who are unable to go to school because of a lack of resources. These are people on a daily basis who are impacted by the lack of water, and who really know the value of this water. And it's instilling that value of water, which is where we need to start with. And I think that's what really needs to be done on the continent.
Tim, when we talk about budgetary allocations, for instance, in Malawi, only 1% of the budget goes to water. How do we get governments to start looking at this and taking it really seriously?
Taking them out of their offices and getting them out into the field where the people live and having to experience the everyday existence of the local communities. Only then will they understand that when you open a tap and no water comes out, you have nothing. And only then will they understand equally that it will impact on their ability for that country to prosper.
But who should be putting the governments under pressure?
The people need to be putting the governments under pressure. Nobody else can. It's not an external force that can turn around and say to you, please go outside and join us. It is the people that need to turn around and say, we voted you into power, come and experience our lifestyle.
Well, it's not all bad news. Stay with us as we look at the connection between water and waste.
In Mozambique, people are trying to link sanitation with an economic return. There, the local mantra is that urine is the new gold.
Welcome back. I'm Kwangu Liwewe. More people have mobile phones than a toilet, and most governments have been unable to supply proper sanitation to keep up with the rapid rate of urbanization. But in Maputo, Mozambique, residents have found an innovative way to use the loo and turn a profit.
Once one of the world's poorest countries, Mozambique has turned its fortunes around. It now has a thriving economy, attractive to investors and buzzing with opportunity. But more than 2/3 of the city's population live in informal settlements in and around Maputo, where access to basic services like clean and safe water are still a luxury. However, within the mazes of these informal settlements are patches of prosperity as poor Mozambicans take ownership of the land. Luis Manjat got his first tract of land as part of the Samora Machel government's revolutionary program of socialist empowerment. He began farming with only his wife and sons to help. Proof of his success, half a dozen employees and a piece of land to call his own, covered in green sprouts of every shade. Ever determined to grow his business, he now has something to help him. Manjat has become one of the first to adopt a new fertilizer. Diluted with water, the nutrients supplement the soil. The liquid not only enriches the soil, but the farmer too. Manjat has cut at least 10% of costs and increased his profits. And getting his produce ready for market takes less time than before. So where does this elixir of the earth come from? Well, from the Manjat family themselves, thanks to this new eco-latrine.
Some of my neighbors questioned me about the benefits of using urine as fertilizer, and I just explained to them that it's good to grow vegetables. So they think it's fine, and some of them buy my vegetables.
The eco-latrine uses a two-chamber system that separates urine and feces. The waste matter is stored in a simple tank where harmful pathogens are killed. Within 40 days, the fermented urine becomes fertilizer, and Manjat's produce is in high demand. It's market day, and as the sun rises, vendors have already made their way to farms like Manjat for his prize produce. Negotiations complete, a whole patch of lettuce is sold and begins its journey.
Lettuce, spinach and other vegetables will be taken to markets in and around Maputo, in some cases as far afield as towns 30 to 40 kilometers outside and across the border even to South Africa and Zimbabwe.
Created and sponsored by WaterAid, the Kubasisa Muganga project has been so successful that what was once discarded as human waste is now precious commodity. However, cost is a potentially prohibiting factor to the eco-latrine. It costs about $700 to install. The system needs to be above ground and kept dry, which adds to the price. And once the plumbing structure has been laid, users still have to scrape together material to build walls and a roof. For farmers such as Manjat, it's not just about the bottom line.
I'm not only working to feed my family, but to develop the country.
There's no denying the potential of these eco-latrines to turn liquid gold into green profit. These women have been gathering on this cooperative farm since 1982. It's a collective effort that spans generations. Today it showcases just how successful the eco-latrine project can be on a large scale. It's a model demonstrating how informal settlements can be turned into sustainable land projects, making the eco-latrine a solution that can be applied across Africa. With far-reaching advantages including not only safe sanitation and cleaner water sources, but also recycling and food production.
Thank you. Now, eventually, the vegetables grown with urine fertilizer make their way onto your dinner plate. It's a concept that some are still struggling to swallow, but there's no doubt the Kubasisa Muganga project is empowering Mozambique's poor. Lindsay Schutel, Maputo, Mozambique.
The responsibility to provide access to clean water should lie with governments, and yet this primary service provider often fails. That's when it's up to non-government organizations to step in. Earlier on, I spoke to Girish Menon, who is the Deputy CEO of WaterAid, a leading international NGO on water and sanitation. I'll take you up on the point about Madagascar and Mozambique because we were there on the ground. As you saw, my producer, Lindsay Schutel, was there on the ground. Have you made any strides at all?
We have made some strides in both the countries, so it's not to sort of deny that there's been no progress, but our main concern is that at current rates of progress, we'll be far away from reaching those targets. So as you saw in the footage itself from your visits to these two countries, in Mozambique, people are trying to link sanitation with an economic return. There, the local mantra is that urine is the new gold, because they find that in a country which traditionally imports a lot of chemical fertilizers, you have something that everyone produces which can directly be used in a scientific way, in a safe way to produce vegetables, boost your income and contribute to the family economy and the national economy.
Finally, let's look at the impact clean and safe water, access to clean and safe water has on women and children. In Malawi, of course, we did see the young girls going to school complaining that no access to clean water affects them in terms of menstruation, and they miss classes because of this. What impact is this having on women and children?
This has a huge impact. At the very basic level, it's at the impact of dignity. We have come across a number of cases where there is violence against women because people don't have a safe place to go. Women have to restrict themselves from relieving, and they often go out into the bushes early in the morning and late at night so that other people don't see them. And everybody knows that that's the time when they go, and these are the places that they go to. And that often has been one of the main contributing reasons for women to be abused, sexually abused, and the case of violence. Now that goes to the heart of basic human dignity, just because they don't have a toilet. So it's an all-around thing. It's social, it's economic, but it's also at the very base of rights and dignity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Menon, for speaking to us on these issues. Thank you. We may take water for granted, but it's clear that would be a mistake. Well, tell us what you think about the continent's precious resource, water. You can send us an email at africa360@enca.com. And if you would like to watch this or previous episodes, go online to www.enca.com/Africa360. And with that, that's the end of this week's show. Do take care, and thanks for watching.